For those steeped in the abstractions of economics and the nuances of central banking policy, these are heady times indeed. The great Keynesian revival is upon us, with all its delicious complexities and thought-provoking contradictions. As we gaze out at the landscape of inflation data and monetary maneuverings, it prompts in the thinking person's mind nothing less than a fundamental re-evaluation of our core economic principles. On the surface, the situation is straightforward enough. Inflation remains stubbornly high, refusing to obey the tidy models and yield to the Federal Reserve's policy tools of suppression. The central bank has raised rates aggressively, delivering blow after blow to the overheated economy in an effort to slay the dragon of rising prices. And yet the beast lives, its fiery breath still scorching the wages and budgets of American families. The numbers are jarring. Around 4.9% for the headline inflation figure as of April. A core measure that strips out food and energy running even hotter at 5.5%. These bitter pills are all the more difficult to swallow when set against the backdrop of the Fed's long-standing 2% target for price growth. What was once a mild simmer has become a raging boil, and the cooks in the kitchen of economic policy are struggling mightily to turn down the burners. Into this crucible of uncertainty steps Rick Rieder, the chief investment officer of global fixed income at the investment behemoth BlackRock. A soothsayer of the markets with a direct line to the priesthood of finance, his words carry the gravitas of Delphi's ancient oracles, and in ruminating on the Fed's unenviable predicament, Rieder paints a portrait that should give us all great pause. It's going to be really hard, if not impossible, for them to achieve their objectives, Rieder proclaims, in that plain-spoken manner that belies the profundity of his judgment. For the Fed to corral inflation back to the hallowed 2% zone, he elaborates, would require a significant economic retrenchment and much higher unemployment than is currently projected. Parse those words, my friends. Drill down into their substantive depths. For what Rieder is espousing here is nothing less than a searing rebuke of the economic pieties that have long shaped our worldview, the seductive fables we've told ourselves about the magical powers of central banks. The childlike faith we've invested in the ability of interest rate sledgehammers to precisely sculpt the economic landscape to our liking. He's suggesting that the Fed's oft-stated goals of price stability and maximum employment may in fact be a theoretical bridge too far. That in the real world of fragilities, imbalances, and unforeseen contingencies, these twin objectives could turn out to be locked in existential conflict, an unsolvable ridge of fiscal dissonance where one priority must ultimately subordinate the other. Consider the implications. The Fed, that benevolent sorcerer toiling away in its marbled eyries, always seemed to operate from a master stratagem neatly aligning stable prices and economic plentitude. Nudge rates here, inject liquidity there, and prosperity for all would inevitably bloom. A gentle green thumb's caress to nurture the economy into a lush flowerbed of household wealth and investor returns. But Rieder's stark avowal casts such starry-eyed fancies in a harsher, more disillusioning light. Perhaps the Fed's policy toolkit is not quite so omnipotent as we imagined. Perhaps the labor market and price levels do not obey central bank dictates with such pliant, lawyerly deference. Perhaps, in blunter terms, there are some economic juggernauts that simply defy fine control, and trying to subjugate them risks causing much greater, unintended damage. This is the cold bath of realpolitik into which the BlackRockian worldview would plunge us. Yes, the Fed could theoretically redouble its hawkish bona fides and crush inflation back towards the 2% promised land. But such single-minded myopia would only be achieved at the catastrophic cost of cratering the job market, that hallowed locus of human utility and self-actualization. For, is unemployment not its own pernicious form of inflation? A devaluation of human capital and potential? A corrosive force that hollows out communities, shrivels household balance sheets, and mortgages the very future prosperity we seek to cultivate? By this indictment, juicing rates to stamp out commodity price pressures would be tantamount to swallowing an arsenic antidote to cure a snake bite. So where does this leave us, adrift on the churning seas of economic ponderation? It suggests, at the very least, a recalibration of our conceptual frameworks. To recognize the limitations and trade-offs encoded into the system. To peer more deeply into those dualities where seemingly sacrosanct policy priorities may be murkier, more contextual, grayer. It hints at a need to shed the straitjacket of rigid inflation targeting and embrace a more holistic perspective that weighs manifold factors: employment, growth, financial conditions, and systemic risk. A kind of enlightened moderation where bright-line rules give way to grittier pragmatism and subtle calibrations. An appreciation that sometimes the higher roadmap isn't about uncompromising fealty to one dogmatic cure-all, but constantly navigating the most palatable path between cumulative evils. This is the Rieder revelation, you could call it, a jolting reminder that behind every sleek equation and tidy central bank model lies a teeming, fractious reality that respects no such formulaic tidiness. That the real world is an unruly place of competing priorities and unintended consequences, a roiling cauldron where our best-laid economic blueprints often go awry in unexpected ways. So let us internalize these lessons in humility. Let us hold our instruments of policy with a renovated reverence for their limitations as much as their powers. For in economics, as in life, there are no actions without contingent effects. Every lever pulled sets profound reactionary forces in motion. And the truest mastery lies not in blind devotion to this doctrine or that, but in striking those higher balances where no principles are violated too absolutely. The Federal Reserve stands at the precipice of such an inflection point. A juncture where stubborn realities are exposing the soft underbelly of dogma. Where the sweep of events compels us to interrogate anew whether our most cherished policy shibboleth still aligns with the greater weal and flourishing we wish to manifest. As this process plays out, we would be wise to heed the whispers of profundities like Rieder. Those modern-day sages whose deep facility with markets and incentives affords them a granular, terrestrial vantage on how things truly are, often in counterpoint to the sanitized, skybound theories from which we mere mortals take such imperfect bearings. For in the end, economics is an earthly, incarnate endeavor. Its truths reside not in inviolable scriptures, but in the gritty determinants of human behavior. Its mastery stems not from abstract genuflection, but a supple sensitivity to the immutable laws encoded into our condition. The best we can do, Fed chairs, investment savants, and ordinary citizens alike, is remain perpetual students with ears tuned to the changing harmonies of the real. To resist the narcotic lure of simplistic dogmas that ill-fit the complexities at hand. To honor those rare insights that reveal the true shape of things, however discomfiting and unconventional the form. This is the Rieder path. The higher road of clear-eyed pragmatism and first principles. It demands we hold our most treasured policy verities to an exacting tribunal not of ideology, but of observable human experience and unconstrained thought. For while inflation may test the technical chops of central bankers, it is also an affliction that probes deeper into the human soul. Laying bare our tendency towards self-delusion. Our insatiable hunger for easy answers and simplistic cure-alls. Our desperate grasping for control deities to insulate us from the great existential uncertainty that is the permanent substratum of our earthly journey. In subjecting us to the scouring fires of economic dislocation, inflation obliges us to shed such infantile dependencies and confront the full existential precarity of our station. It's a merciless editor that baldly exposes the fiction of our precious policy mythologies when they prove discordant with the facts on the ground. And so the truest conquest, the one that transcends transitory inflation spikes and fluctuating basis points, is an evolution of consciousness itself, a graduation from that childlike craving for parental economists and central bank deities to pacify us with certitude and placating dogmas. It's here that Rieder's stance offers a quintessential syllabus for the higher mindset we're compelled to adopt. His candid assessment isn't just a tactician's brief on the mechanics of inflation dynamics. No, it's a profound spiritual exhortation to expand our economic perspectives beyond simplistic bright-line rules and into a more capacious, paradoxical appreciation of the world's irreducible contingencies. In diagnosing the Fed's probable inability to restore 2% inflation without grievous employment collateral damage, Rieder isn't just issuing a technical situational update. He's casting lurid light on that tensile inflection point where our loftiest policy talismans collide with the unyielding contingencies of the ground truth. where elegant theories fracture upon the scouring urgencies of human want and systemic fragility. It's a visceral call to face the fact that any policy, however ingeniously constructed, will always represent an incursion into an unfathomably complex system, one whose very scale and interconnected immensity renders overall control an arrogant fiction. It's a summons to move beyond naive visions of an economy as a static engine compartment that merely needs the right macroeconomic levers pulled to reset it to factory settings. For in the beautifully fractal world Rieder's realism discloses, there are only ecosystems. Holistic meshworks of perpetual adaptation and flux. Organic, amorphous, scudding flows of capital, labor, energy, sentiment and risk that swirl in nonlinear ways no model could ever circumscribe. To seek to fully subdue such a tangled, dynamic wholeness to any one isolated prescriptive overlay is folly of the highest order. The true policy sage understands this. She recognizes that the economy is no more a billiard ball system to be mechanistically rearranged than the galaxy is a stray bundle of hydrogen orbs awaiting our ordering dyadics. Both are intricately webbed systems of asystole, their inceptive chaos and irreducible unpredictability essential to their very animation and persisting emergence. So to seek to conquer or tame such vast, self-organizing systems through reductive policy interventions is a delusion of hubristic control. It's like a solitary gardener with a trowel and watering can attempting to bend an entire rainforest ecosystem to their precise horticultural vision. Yes, they may sculpt and alter here and there through their tiny implements. But the system as an organic whole will always elude their totalizing grasp, flowing with its own deeper, systemic logics. This is the essential reframing, the molting of consciousness, Rieder's heretical tracks initiate us into. A recognition that our best policies are but improvisational scores we overlay atop the churning, evolutionary unfoldings of inhuman becomings vastly vaster than our mortal purview. Temporary waypoints of navigation, not end destinations of certain arrival. Even the hallowed inflation target. That primordial fixed point around which so much of our economic scripture has calcified. What if it too must be deconstructed and transcended? Cast not as a universally constituted divine formula or amulet warding off misfortune? But simply one more conceptual datum point to hold in provisional, pluralistic context? For the humble oracle like Rieder apprehends that such targets are arbitrary social constructs. Symbolic vessels useful to a point for anchoring expectations and imposing provisional order. But ultimately, idols to be toppled whenever the sheer contingency and mutability of reality itself insists. An inflation target is not a universal law to which the economic universe must subserve. It's simply a policy heuristic for a season. A waypoint of coherence that holds form and utility only so long as the riotous, innumerable variables comprising the economic cosmos happen to align in permissive harmony with such an arbitrary imposition. And the instant that infinitely improbable synchrony frays, the target itself reverts to the mere conceptual fiction it always was.